It's round one, and Sega is flexing its newfound muscles with its brand new game system.
Hoping to win back a larger share of the market.
Sales that are expected to bring in $45 million, and that's just today.
In the cutthroat video game industry, one word seems to be all-powerful.
The graphics. Better graphics means it's more realistic.
Dreamcast will bring in more in one day than even the hit movie Star Wars: The Phantom Menace made on its opening day.
Dreamcast.
Sega Dreamcast.
It's thinking.
Although players couldn't have known at the time, the Dreamcast represented Sega cashing in all its chips in the console business. The past 15-odd years had been a thrill ride of high highs and low lows for Sega fans. The Mark III, released in North America as the Master System, was more powerful than the NES, but failed to catch on. Sega hit the jackpot in 1989 with the Sega Genesis.
Gotta go. Hey, guy, you're the first serious gamer I've seen all morning. Check this out. Brand new 16-bit Super Nintendo with Super Mario World. Wow!
What's this one?
Oh, this is a Sonic the Hedgehog from Sega Genesis. Hey, look at these radical colors, huh?
Wow, Sonic's fast, too.
No, over here.
I like Genesis, and it costs a lot less.
Wait, kid, that game
I'll
there.
take Sonic and Genesis.
I knew that.
Sonic the Hedgehog. More action, more speed. Sega Genesis, it's a whole lot more for less.
Games like Sonic the Hedgehog and Mortal Kombat, complete with Blood Code, catered to an older demographic of players who wanted games with attitude. With a loaded software library, Sega emerged as the first real challenger to Nintendo. They were a marketing powerhouse, and they got me to ask my parents for one instead of a Super Nintendo. That was the highlight of like the pixel art days, like the two powerhouses of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. From that point on, Sega placed some bad bets. The Sega CD was hailed at launch as a great peripheral to capitalize on the CD-ROM fad, but sales declined as its library grew with marginally updated ports of cartridge games. The 32X turned Sega Genesis into a rat's nest of peripherals and power cords, and was nothing but a placeholder until the company's 32-bit console was ready.
There are lots of good reasons to go with Sega Saturn instead of Pretendo. We call them games. Sega Saturn has tons of them. Pretendo has just a few. It does beg the question, do you want to play or twiddle your thumbs? Face it, Pretendo, you weren't worth waiting for.
History remembers the Saturn, Sega's long-awaited heir to the Genesis, as both a troubled piece of hardware and host to one of the most unique game libraries of all time that failed to stand up to mounting competition from Sony's PlayStation.
The Saturn, to me, always felt kind of like an afterthought. They put out so many good games on that thing, and a lot of their known series got their start there. Like Nights into Dreams is one of the most beloved Sega IPs of all time, and you don't really think about it was a Saturn game. It started as a Saturn game. Same with things like Panzer Dragoon and a lot of other good ones.
As a kid, you're like, that thing is super cool, and you always had that one friend that had an older brother that had a job that had it. So you'd go over there and be like, oh my god, this is amazing. Look at these graphics. And I think Panzer Dragoon was the game he had. And it was just we're like, oh my god, I've never seen graphics like this.
It felt like it kind of just was in the background while Nintendo and PlayStation were fighting it out with the N64 and PlayStation every week.
As a kid, you didn't notice that stuff, but being a gaming journalist for the last 12 years, they fragmented their user base too quickly. I feel with the Saturn, you can't keep introducing a new console or even at the same time consoles without giving it the support that it needs to stay live with the software. And they were in such a rush to beat out these other platforms, and it really hurt them. Without a slam dunk since the Genesis, and facing stiff competition from Nintendo and Sony, Sega went into the late 1990s in need of a hit. released in Japan in November 1998 and September 9th, 1999 in the US, Dreamcast exploded onto the scene with 128-bit graphics, a 200 MHz processor, and 16 megabytes of RAM, an absolute beast for its era. It was also the first console to feature a built-in modem for online gaming, offering console players a taste of the PC scene's online gaming craze.
What a great system. What an unfortunate set of events to lead to its demise, but yeah. I consider it one of the best systems ever made. They did some really cool stuff, man.
The Dreamcast was an awesome punk rock era of gaming where it did so much for quality.
This is the time where like arcades were arguably at their peak, right? And you're getting arcade game graphics on a console because we'd all played the arcade ports and they always suffered.
And then I saw Soul Calibur, and that was that moment where I was like, oh my god, this is arcade quality, right? That was like the whole argument that was happening at the time. But it was like, to me, it was better than arcade quality. I was like, oh, arcades are dead. Dreamcast felt like that moment where it was like, I really don't need to go to the arcade anymore. Because you had this like gorgeous fighting game in Soul Calibur that was just stunning. And then, it was accessible, that you could play it with your friends at home.
My favorite Dreamcast game is one of my favorite fighting games of all time, which is going to be Capcom versus SNK 2. I think that is a magic moment in fighting game history that we probably won't see again for a while. Like I cross my fingers for it every day, hoping that they make that announcement of Capcom versus SNK 3. But it just feels like in that moment, you had so much history between two companies that have been bitter rivals for a while. And they brought like everything together. They brought all the best characters from every one of their games together. They brought all the best mechanics from all their games together. Like it was the one time where like you could take Ryu and give him a Samurai Showdown like rage meter to play with if he really wanted to, or like any one of the other like systems that they had. And it was amazing. It felt like the top tier of 2D fighting as we know it.
I do want to mention, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 was also on this thing, and it was amazing on it. That was another one of those moments where I was like, holy crap, this looks exactly like the arcade.
I've already shouted out Capcom vs. SNK 2 ad nauseum, but like I think some of the best times I ever had with that system was playing NFL 2K.
Which looked amazing, right? Just like graphically, I was like, wow, that's stunning. It's actual competition for Madden, so that was cool.
I really do miss those days when we had options, when we had quality, when we had stuff like being able to make characters in NFL 2K2 and just play them in random games against my buddies and just come up with the most ridiculous stuff and then throw 90-yard touchdown passes is some of the funnest times I've ever had in gaming. I kind of wish we had that back in some way, but that system will always hit me as some of the funnest and most interesting times we've ever had in gaming history.
And in my opinion, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 are best played on the Dreamcast. Like, that was the system for those two games. And you see it on Dreamcast, and it's running at a great frame rate. It looks awesome. Crazy Taxi, played that a ton. And that was like the game that your friend hasn't played the Dreamcast yet. That's like the game that you were showing them first. And everyone has that stupid Offspring song stuck in their head.
Ready? Here we go! Yeah.
I feel like Dreamcast really was a special console, and even the controller, like, it was weird as hell, but I actually enjoyed how it felt in the hand. It wasn't too heavy. It had a solid analog joystick. It didn't have C buttons, which at the time I was really sick of. But yeah, like, they did some really cool stuff, man.
Resident Evil Code Veronica, because I was a huge RE fan, and like it was exclusive. We rented it for the weekend. That was the game we got, and that's the game we couldn't turn off because we didn't have a memory card. So we played through it hoping we could beat it in 2 days. And we thought, David, you'll love this. We thought that like the complex, the military complex, once we escaped that, the game was over. So you can imagine our surprise on like Sunday evening when the parents are like, let's go, put away the Dreamcast. We have to return it. And we're like, we finally reached the end of the complex after 2 days of farting around. There are no guides back then, right? Like not physical guides. And then there's a whole nother section. Just like, what? We just spent 2 days. So Code Veronica was our favorite game to play on it, just because of that, my fandom for Resident Evil and it being exclusive and so hard to play at the time without having a Dreamcast.
I thought it was the most interesting memory card that anyone has ever produced. It was so wild being able to like play Code Veronica, and instead of having to check the menu every like 5 seconds to see if you were damaged, you could just look down at the display on the VMU and see like fine, caution, danger. It was so cool in Soul Calibur being able to see your little digitized character on the VMU in pixel form like a Tamagotchi. And I know that there was like so many other cool... one of the ones that I really wish I'd gotten to see and play with was Chocobo Dungeon. Had a like virtual pet chocobo that could be loaded onto the VMU, and you could like feed them and train them up and like take that experience back to the main game. It's kind of a shame to me that no one has ever tried that again.
There's one really weird game. I wouldn't say it's that weird, but the game that like I really thought that this system had a chance of like achieving escape velocity with Space Channel 5, because that was different. Ooh La La was different. And man, I went to the E3 the year that they were pushing Dreamcast super hard, and the Sega booth was a Dreamcast, like a big ass Dreamcast, and they had like Ooh La La there, and Ooh La La is like one of their best characters. So cool, funny, like female protagonist. She's a journalist, like she's got a lot going on, and she dances like the wind. That game was ridiculous. There's that one final battle with like the aliens or Michael Jackson where you literally had to do the opposite moves. I would just flip my controller upside down for that. But yeah, like those are the games that started to really, for me, to show the value of the Dreamcast, right? Because Space Channel 5 was exclusive. It looked amazing. It played amazing. It even had Michael Jackson cameo in it, which is super weird. The system largely became about like, what are these weird things I can do here?
Yeah, it really did feel like a time in which Sega was throwing everything they had at the wall and seeing what stuck, and for better or worse, let's say. But at the same time, it was also a period in which we got some of the most crazy things that we'll ever see in game. Sega was like doing modern day indie game publishing on the Dreamcast the way that we know it today back in the Dreamcast days. And it was like this wacky time in which anything could happen and did happen for a little bit there. We have Steam nowadays where like you have indie publishers a dime a dozen coming out with new things every day. But Sega has always been kind of one of those groups that was kind of punk rock when it came to their lineups. Like that goes all the way back to the Sega Genesis with just like the murky style of like things like Comic Zone. But they kept that feeling and vibe alive in the Dreamcast era, and it really gave us some interesting stuff because of that, just sheer nature of them.
I did purchase Seaman, which was like, I don't know if there's a win condition for that game or... I never won. It was weird as hell. My friend bought Sega Bass Fishing with the reel. So like that was the other thing about Dreamcast. Like they had Bass Fishing with that fishing attachment, and then they had Typing of the Dead, right? Which is like a keyboard based game for Dreamcast. And then yeah, like that you could even use the Dreamcast. Like I knew someone who wrote articles for one of our websites using the Dreamcast web browser. Like that's how weird that system was. I think the Dreamcast doesn't get enough love about stuff like that. They were taking these risks, but they were hitting home runs with almost all of them.
The $199 Dreamcast comes with a built-in modem, making it the first set built for online gaming.
One of Sega's more forward-thinking moves was the inclusion of a dial-up modem with the Dreamcast, allowing players to meet up with friends and strangers in an age before going online was the norm in a console space.
People don't think about it much, but like online gaming at the Dreamcast was still very young. Like we didn't have wireless internet. We didn't have 100 gigabyte download speeds and 20 gigabyte upload speeds. I remember when we first got like 56K and even when we had DSL, having to check and make sure that my family wasn't going to be getting on the phone for a while, because you had to take up one of the phone lines to be able to play those games. And it was amazing. This system in which you can just turn it on, connect to the internet with one wire sticking out of the back of the system, and be able to play with other players in the same game around the world. And like, we take it for granted so much nowadays, but back then it was like truly mind-blowing.
We believe the future of gaming is the internet, and the Sega Dreamcast provides internet connectivity, a 56K built-in modem at $199. At launch, email, chat, and an unbelievable amount of content.
The latency was terrible. It felt like the keyboard and mouse even had latency compared to like a PC. But like, if you were someone who was used to playing keyboard and mouse games on PC, it's kind of like Counter-Strike on Xbox. Like it was hugely popular on Xbox, but obviously the better way to play it was on PC, but not everyone had PC. Dreamcast was weird, where it was more powerful than a lot of people's computers. Like, it just was.
For all of Sega's audacious and experimental games, the Dreamcast proved no match for Sony's PlayStation 2. In March 2001, just over 18 months after the system launched in the United States, Sega pulled the plug and announced that it would exit the console market.
As much as people that had the Dreamcast loved the Dreamcast, it felt like, I also feel like it just didn't catch on with the at-large crowds.
But I feel like that's like they had a lot of powerhouse games, and then as PlayStation started to do the ports and they started to do it better and there were more developers on it, like, and people just decided that this ecosystem is more stable than what Sega had been doing for the last, I don't know, several years. I say they've released them pretty quickly.
We had that weird moment as Nintendo fans, because for 20 years it was say Nintendo, Genesis does, all that crap. And then Super Monkey Ball is a launch title for GameCube, and it's at Space World. You know what I mean? It says, like, what a wild couple of years that was. Like, because now Mario and Sonic are going to the Olympics all the time. Like, this was like a peace treaty level of, the end of a console war.
Sega and video game players around the world will celebrate the silver anniversary of the Dreamcast launch in the US. As Shacknews reflects on one of the industry's most underappreciated consoles, the editors pondered a big question. What is the legacy of the Dreamcast a quarter of a century later?
I still know people that like extol how much they loved playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on that platform more than they loved playing it on any other platform. The same with like the technology that they were using. Like, Sega kind of pioneered a lot of stuff that we take for granted as far as modern day gaming, like online play, just the quality and variety of games that were coming out, the style of games that were coming out, everything from the small to the big. And I think that system should always be remembered for just how much it trailblazed technology and software and hardware for gaming as we know it today.
I think it should be remembered fondly. I think it plays a pivotal point in history. I think it plays a pivotal point in console design and console cycles, and I think it plays a pivotal point in Sega's overall just history of video game development in general.
It's sad that a lot of people missed out entirely on this. I always thought that this would be a good console to do the whole SNES Mini thing with. Like, they should just make a Dreamcast Mini, put these 20 games on it, and I'll pay $100 for it.
Close my eyes and feel it burn. Now I see what